Everybody. Welcome to the second event of our 2022 Northwest Voices season. I want to thank the Longview Library Foundation for making this event possible tonight. This is one I'm particularly excited about. I want to tell you all that after Ann gives her presentation, we'll have an opportunity for Q&A, and so you'll want to use the Q&A function down at the bottom of your screen, and then I'll moderate and pass those questions along. So I'll start out saying Ann Stinson grew up near Toledo, Washington. After high school, her interests took her to Japan, New York, and Portland. She earned a BA in English from Western Washington University and an MA in East Asian Languages and Culture from Columbia. A former school teacher, she is the president of the Family Forest Foundation and is on the board of the Washington Farm Forestry Association. And I want to say that this book was such a pleasure to read. It was thrilling to see someone writing so beautifully about this area where I was raised. And the way she holds the various strands of investigation, reflection, memoir, and observation of the natural world in such exquisite, resonant balance is a tremendous achievement. It's thrilling to read a new major Pacific Northwest writer. And so we're very thrilled to have her with us tonight. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ann.
All right, thank you very much, Austin.
Okay. You're still muted. Just one second, everybody. And we still can't hear you. Just that one more step, I think.
You worked before.
And here you are. We can hear you.
Okay, but I can't see my screen. Let me see here. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, everyone. All right. I want to say first that I am so thrilled to be here talking with people that know the Longview Public Library. It's my first library. I grew up in Toledo and there was no library. And my mother was the organist and choir director at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in Longview. And so every Wednesday she would drop me and my brother and my sister off at the library for about an hour and a half, and we had free reign of this place. And we had a 10-book limit, and we took full advantage of that, and also then explored upstairs into the adult area and wandered around that top loft. We thought we were so grown up. We learned how to use the card catalogs. I have a distinct memory of once we were driving back on I-5 and we begged Mom to drive right in front of the car behind us so that we could keep reading with their headlights. I think that she said yes. So I'm very happy to be here talking to people of Longview and environs. I'm going to arrange this talk about how I wrote this book. And at first I didn't know that I was writing a book. I started going to the creative arts community at Manuka. They host a summer program, a summer art camp every year at Manuka. And my mom had been going for many years. She's a ceramic artist, but they always have one writing class, which is great because I am not a visual artist. And the first year that I went was the year that my brother was diagnosed with cancer. And I went for 3 years after that, and during which time he passed away after fighting. And this is a page from that writing workshop that is now part of my book, and I'm just going to read a little bit from that. Simple berry buckle. butter, eggs, sugar, lemon, flour, and berries. Pickling the berries is the best part. It brings Steve to me. He died with blackberry scratches on his hands, and the vines still grow, trailing blackberries low to the ground. New vines stretch across the edge of a clear cut, now filling with 4-year-old pine, fir, and cedar, along with foxglove, mullein, and daisies. It was Steve's favorite spot, and it is still full of fruit. Next year, the shade from the growing trees might not let in enough sunlight. The berries' dark purple juices stain my fingers. My favorite trove this summer is a broken down cedar log, decaying for 40 to 60 years, its red flesh webbed with vines, each bearing 5 or 6 plump berries. A pileated woodpecker drums nearby, a hummingbird whirs in the fireweed. I am so determined to pick a berry hiding under a salal leaf, I get nettles on my chin. Steve feels near and I can almost hear him chuckling. An hour of picking and my container is full. I walk back in my hickory shirt and Carhartts, my arms and legs unpierced by the thorns. The berry juices paint the batter red. The oven that baked Steve's last pie plumps and goldens the cake. Our fractured but mending family digs through cream to the warm buckle and finds Steve's berries from the young forest. A couple of years after I started going to Manuka, I took a class from Mark Cunningham. He's an author and he has his own press and podcast that he's a man of many talents. I took a class with him from literary arts and it was on form. And I read a lot of different books that played with how to put words on the page. And so that gave me some freedom to play with form myself. So in the book, I've got lists on the left-hand side of this picture. It's a list of books that Steve loved and the ideas that he got from them. On the right-hand side, there is, on the same picture, is a list of his music interests and what Lugene, his wife, said about his love of those. And then on the right-hand side is one of the chapters in the book is history of the early logging in the Toledo area. And I found some photographs in the Toledo Community Story, which is published by the Toledo Historical Society. And I used this thing that I used to use with my middle school students with primary sources. It's called Observe, Reflect, Question. And so I've got 2 photos and a little story from that same Toledo history book where I write, just observe so I noticed that none of the men wear hats. Many are wearing Civil War uniforms. Reflect, hats must have been disrespectful at a meal, even outside. Questions, what's the food? What are they drinking? So instead of trying to write prose, I just wrote questions. And part of that was because there are no answers to these questions. It's really hard to find that hyper local history. So that's what I did. And I had a lot of fun doing that. And then I kept working with Mark. I hired him to, he believed in my project, and which was sort of amazing to me. And he kind of helped me realize that I had a book. And so I started sending him all my pages, and he commented on them and also wrote me letters about what I was doing. And one of the things that I had realized by this point was that I wanted to do a history of the land, who were all the people who had owned our land prior, and so I did a bunch of research on that, and I'm going to read you, first I'm going to read to you a section from one of the letters that Mark wrote to me, and I hope that all of you find someone to help you with your writing as much as he helped me with mine. Regarding the new version of chapter 12 here, Callous Peoples, this is an excerpt from one of his letters. I really admire the work you've done on the pre-existing material and the marvelous additions and new discoveries through this chapter. The genealogical elaborations concerning Tasmith, one of the Cowlitz daughters, the vivid descriptions of the powwow, and finally, the incredible convergence of imagery in your discovery of the ledger style art tradition all are superb. Aside from the textual edits I've suggested, my main point of feedback on chapter 12 is that while the chapter clearly has a narrative logic within which the ideas and chain of imagery all fit, the chapter seems to feel in want of an equally clear form, a formal shape or framing device that can more cohesively structure and convey your explanation of ideas and images. In other words, your chapter is a mess, get it organized. So I ended up using the Raven story, which is a story told by many of the Salish tribes, including the Cowlitz, and one that Steve loved to tell at moon parties on the tree farm to organize the chapter. I'll read a small section so you can see how that worked. The trees and soil that make up our tree farm are the center of the traditional Cowlitz tribal lands. In the 19th century, the Cowlitz understanding of land did not depend on use of surveys, deeds, boundary lines, or individual ownership. My query of who owned our land, first answered by a narrow ladder of names found in large ledgers, broadens out into an answer that changes the question, expands to thinking about an entire culture. I want to know more about the community of people who were the first people to hunt deer and elk, gather camas and cedar bark, and drink fresh spring water from the land that now hosts our vegetable garden, empty doghouse, Gemini Grove, and the current Clearcut. Many Northwest Native American tribes, including the coastal Salish, the larger linguistic group to which the Cowlitz belong, have a story about Raven. Steve loved the story, one he first found in Bill Reed and Robert Bringhurst's The Raven Steals the Light, and he would tell it at moon rising parties. As with all tales from oral traditions, versions abound and are shaped anew in each telling. Steve stands next to the fire pit at the bluff's edge. The moon is rising in a cloudless sky from behind Mount Rainier. He smiles and begins. At the beginning of time, the earth was covered in darkness, an inky, pitchy darkness. There were no stars and moons to light up the evening sky, and no sun to shine in the day. It was very difficult for anyone to hunt or fish or gather berries for food. There was an old man who lived along the banks of a stream with his daughter. He had boxes within boxes, and the smallest one contained all the light in the world. Every day he opened the boxes and said, "All the light in the world is mine, all mine. If no one can see my daughter, no one can know if my daughter is beautiful, and she will not leave me." Lujane and I drive to Bear Haven, home of Roy Wilson, honorary chief and spiritual leader of the Cowlitz. I've called to make an appointment to see the Longhouse, a museum he has built about 5 miles west of the Cowlitz River. And the tall, white-haired 90-year-old man is waiting for us on his riding lawnmower. So I go back and forth between what I learned about the Cowlitz with my brother telling the story and then the actual story. So that was also kind of a fun form to play with. Then while I was writing and revising and working with Mark, I took another class with literary arts, and this one was called The Lyric Essay. It was taught by Jennifer Denbrough, and she had us do an exercise that somehow blew open my brain to a way that helped me organize this whole book. She had everybody put a topic at the top of the paper that they were thinking about writing about, and then just pass it down, and everybody wrote a comment or a question about that, that topic. And so, you know, I'm in Portland, and so people ask questions like, how old are the trees? Do loggers wear flannel shirts, or is that a stereotype? Is there even a contemporary relationship between harvest and logging? It seems like commercialism gone amok. But what happened was I wrote, at the time we were doing a harvest on 12 acres. And I decided to write about that as the first chapter of the book. And then the last chapter of the book is the planting of those same 12 acres. And then so everything in the middle is about my brother. It's about me leaving the farm and coming back. It's about the history of the land. And also I decided that I needed to figure out where our wood went and how it gets turned into lumber. I'll talk a little bit more about that first in a while, but I'll read just a little bit from what turned out to be the first chapter, though it was certainly not the first thing that I wrote. My family moved to this land in 1972 when I was 9. We'd lived in Seattle for 2 years prior, and I invited my best friend from those days to the tree farm. We had just logged along the country road that bisects our farm, and I ducked my friend's head down in the car so she wouldn't see the stumps. Where did this instinct come from? How did I know at 9 that city people looking at a cutover see only destruction? Logging is a link in the chain that brings a natural renewable resource out of the woods and into the public, often urban space. It's almost as if this handoff from rural people who tend and harvest to urban people who purchase and consume is secret and silent. It ought to be a celebration, a merging of peoples, an acknowledgement and appreciation of gifts. Language is part of the problem. We don't have a good name for our land. Non-industrial private forest is too bulky and tells us what we are more than what we aren't more than what we are. Timberland conjures up lumberjacks or shoes worn by hipsters. Tree farm makes people think of Christmas trees. The woods is what Dad says when he's going to mulch, tube, or thin, but it's not really a name. Forest conjures up a park, untouched nature, but when was natural? So then, like I said, I decided I wanted to know where our wood goes. And so first I traveled to a little small cedar mill called Reichert's. It's just 1.5 miles from our tree farm. And I interviewed the various people there, and that was great. And I'm really glad I did. That mill is no longer, it was bought out by a competitor and shut down. And then I got this idea that I really wanted to ride a log ship from the port of Longview to Japan, because many of our logs are sold to Japan, China, and Korea. And at first, the shipping company said yes, and then they said no. But Dad and I were able to visit one ship that was taking logs from the Pacific Northwest to those 3 countries. And we were able to meet the captain and the crew. And I gave the captain and a crew this box right here, and inside was a Instax camera and a notebook and specific instructions on what to do, write notes. I'm a teacher, so I gave examples. And they went across the ocean for 2.5 weeks, and Dad and I flew to Japan, and then we were able to get on that same ship and see the same captain, and he actually had done what I'd asked. He'd taken pictures, taped them in, and wrote notes. And we were able to ride that ship for 24 hours from one port in Japan to the next. And I'm just going to read a little bit from the section in the book that's about being on the ship. I opened the ship's log and studied the crew's photos from the 20-day voyage. Captain Alfonso is in charge of a crew of 19, all a Filipino working a 9-month contract. One of his main jobs, he says, is to make sure the crew's relationships are harmonious. I organize birthday parties and join the crew to sing karaoke with the magic singing machine in the evenings. Captain Alfonso asks, "Your dad is so strong. What's his secret?" "Yoga," I reply, "and he works in the forest." "Does he smoke?" "No, but he drinks, and his mind is clear. He doesn't worry." The captain nods. He tells me his uncle was also a ship captain. Hearing his uncle's stories made him dream of becoming one too. He graduated from the Philippine Maritime Institute in 1978 and has been traveling the oceans since. One of the pictures that he put on in the book was just this ship full of logs, and he wrote down that there were 6,409,000 board feet of wood. I determined that that was 1,300 log trucks, 200 acres of 40-year-old trees. And then I just thought, that's too much. The numbers stagger, the appetite of the world's population overwhelms. Once I had a full draft, I sent the whole thing to a friend of mine in New Jersey from my East Coast days. And then I flew out to her. You always need an excuse to go visit the East Coast. And she helped me a lot with some ideas. And a big one was, I have a chapter in here that's specifically about my mom. And since I was playing with form, decided that I would format that chapter in interview style, question, answer, question, answer. But she said that made my mom feel too far away, like I didn't know who my mom was. So I changed it to prose, just a straight up narrative, and I agreed with her, and it sounded much better. And I'm going to read to you a little bit about that. In the months after Steve's death, Mom made a vessel she calls a pieta, and that's a photograph of the vessel that she made. And I wanted to know more about it. On a May afternoon, we sit in the carpet at the farm next to the blue door leading to the freezer, the sauna, the canned goods, and the half racks of beer. Blue Moon for Mom and Bridgeport IPA for Dad. One of the first sunny days this year, it is glorious. Dandelions and heather and lilacs and tulips are in full force, and rosebuds already single summer. Mom sits in her customary chair on her blue cushion. It's the chair she sits in to smoke her Marlboro Lights, to follow the Blazers games, play with Words with Friends on her phone, monitor the progression of seasons, and watch the birds. Next to her chair on a wooden box sits 2 gallon jars. One holds a lighter, a notepad, and a pen for an occasional haiku. Wads of silver paper, cigarette pack linings, fill the other jar, awaiting an art project. I sit on the concrete, my feet in the gravel. She tisks and said, "A man once told me sitting on the concrete is bad for your parts." I sit anyway. Mom tells me the Pieta was inspired by the turtle goddess of Myrtos. The Greek figure with the pitcher in the arms seems to me a parallel to the central concept of the traditional Pieta, the mother holding the dying Jesus. I mean, this figure is cradling a pitcher in her arm. In my thinking, she says, it symbolizes the dead child. Religion, such as Christianity, provides a vocabulary and iconography to express things that are difficult to express. As she sees it, the mother and dead son are communicating without words. In the original Greek figure, the water, liquid, can pass from the mother shape to the child shape, the pitcher. I closed that passageway to mark the ending of the relationship. I now know the relationship with Steve doesn't end. I could have left the hole open. I didn't realize that until quite a while after I finished the piece. The very last chapter I wrote, but not the last chapter of the book, I wrote as a request from OSU Press. So I had sent the book to about 10 publishers, and OSU Press said, yes, we want to publish it, which amazed me, and I'm still thrilled and thankful. And the acquisitions editor, it was during 2020 when all those horrible fires were happening. And he said, you've got to have something about fire in your book because your book is about forests. And I was like, well, we've never had a fire, so how can I write about that? But I had, in an earlier version of the book, had included a section on all of the different problems that our forest is facing because of climate change. We've got some bugs that we didn't used to have. We have more incidences of a fungus in the soil. So I had written about that and being with my dad in the forest and how disappointing that was for him. And I'd taken it out because it felt too heavy. But now with the fire, I decided to put that back in. And then I wrote, I also included in the fire chapter a Native American myth about mice escaping forest fires by hiding in Douglas fir cones. And I'm going to read you just a short bit from the fire chapter. Fires have always been part of the forest ecosystem, but they have increased severity and frequency. Growing numbers of humans live on land that was once forest. Unlike the mice, we cannot hide in Douglas fir cones. And unlike the mice, we are not blameless. The side effects of our comfortable, industrialized lives destabilize the climate. Prolonged, increasingly arid Pacific Northwest summers make forests more susceptible to pathogens and pests. While the mighty Douglas fir has long dominated our local forests, root rot, fir twig weevils, and phomopsis threaten it. The trees these kill are perfect fuel for fire. The lack of rain stresses the animals too. Our forests drink from the streams and wetlands, but in the summer, they have to trek over the ridge to the Cowlitz River. As the summers stretch on, they must do this more and more. So far, fire has not threatened our forests. Our tree farm's topography protects us from most extreme wind. Still, each summer we are on high alert. At a whiff of smoke, we'll jump into the pickup to patrol the gravel roads for errant embers from a neighbor's ill-advised brush pile. We fill our 300-gallon pump trailer and position it to use it in an instant, and we pray for rain and soft winds. While I was editing the book based on the suggestions of two reviewers from OSU Press, I took a poetry writing workshop with Two Sylvias Press out of Seattle. And one of the other members of that workshop, Melody Wilson, she's instructor here at Portland Community College. She and another woman started a Facebook group that still meets, and I meet with them on a regular basis. And I submitted my poems that were in this book to that group, and they made them better. In fact, one of them, they said wasn't a poem, so I turned it back into prose. But there are two poems left in the book, and both of them are probably the most emotional parts of the book. One is about a particularly traumatic event with my brother, and one is a really joyful poem about me and my sister-in-law, Lou Jean. And I'm going to end the presentation with the joyful poem. Across Collins Road from the driveway and paper box is the well-traveled trail to the spring, to the 5-year-old pine and cedar plantation, to the island of 70-year-old cedar and fir, the western boundary to the wetland with ash and camas. Lou Jean and I are the new owners of this family land, bought in 1971 by my dad, our current senior forester. As raven, eagle, and red-tailed hawk, Steve watches us, Lou Jean's husband, my brother. This year, we find 2 new treasures on the trail, as if the land wants to welcome its new nurturers. First, an edible-looking leaf abundant in the boggy swamp. Parsley-like leaves, we taste it. No numb lips or tongues. Our phones tell us it's lovage. We gather more. In the cold mud, our rubber boots sink to mid-shin. Cottonwood buds are beginning to burst above. I make lovage pesto with olive oil, walnuts, and lemon. Lively, bright green sauce on friend-caught halibut. A few weeks later, on the same trail, we spot a brown-ridged cone pushing up through last autumn's leaves. A mushroom, but what kind? Chanterelles don't grow on this trail. Lou Jean thanks morel, and after 2 YouTube videos contrasting true and false morels, we race home to gather knives and a basket, giddy with our find. Our land grew it. We found it. Our knives slice the pitted plump caps from the hollow stems. 15 crowns fill one of Mom's ceramic plates. We take photos before slicing to share with those not present at tonight's table. Butter, garlic, heat, cast iron, spatula, toasted country blonde, imported from Portland. We bite and hear a red-tailed hawk sing with pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I want to remind everybody now, if you have your questions, to put those in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll ask those as we see them. But one of the things I wanted to start off with, a couple of process questions. One, I was curious about writing about memory. I know people approach writing about your memories different ways. I was wondering if you stay with how you remember things, or if did you check with the people who
Yeah.
shared the experiences? So that's my first one.
Yes, yeah. No, I made sure that, I mean, it's my story. So of course, but I wanted to make sure that no one remembered it as differently enough to be mad at the way that I told it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And that leads into another question I had reading the book, which is that, it's very personal. What was it like writing about family? How did you approach writing, especially difficult things about family?
Right. Yeah. I asked each person, I mean, all of my mom and my dad and Eugene, the main characters that are that I write about. And I gave it to them and asked them to read it. And is it okay? And Eugene asked me to take out two very minor things. I was so happy that she allowed me to tell her story, as my version of her story. Mom and dad, I gave it to them. And then when it came out in book form, they claimed never to have seen it before.
Oh.
And I mean, not quite, but it was like, I haven't seen this. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And I'm sure, I think what happened was, one, it is really emotional, and that's hard to keep in your head. And also, when I gave it to them, it was a binder. It was a blue binder with 3 ring, page. It doesn't feel like a book. So your mind reads it in a different way. And then there's sort of a funny thing. There's a few errors in this book, and which is incredible to me, because it got proofread 5,000 times by 15 different people. But in the book, I say that the pickup that we drive is a Ford Tundra, and it's a Toyota Tundra. There are no Ford Tundras. And so my dad's like, I would have caught that. I'm sure I haven't read this. I would have caught that mistake. Anyway, and so what do you say? I mean,
right.
Yeah. So, but they're okay. They're I think it definitely brought up emotions all the way around. And when the book first came out, the actual book, Dad read it twice all the way through, and we talked about it. And then Mom, she started reading it all the way through like 6 months ago and just finished.
Oh, okay. Wow.
It was, it brings up so much. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I would imagine.
So thank you again, family.
And you had mentioned not knowing you were writing a book. And so I was kind of curious to ask more sort of about the genesis. Did you have aspirations about writing about your family, or was this a thing that sort of just came up, like you said?
It was organic. Yeah, no, it's not. No, I didn't think that I would write a book. No.
Wow.
I mean, I love to read. I mean, I'm an English major, but I never, I got a C in creative writing in college. I mean, I just, didn't like what I had to say. But yeah, no, it's not something that I had envisioned myself doing. But I'm really happy that I did, and I hope that it's not the last one.
Yeah, me too. And then another thing that I was curious about hearing you talk about more, you alluded to this in your presentation, is how you're thinking about your forest with the changes and challenges of climate change. How are you thinking about the future of your forest? Or is it sort of you're taking it,
I mean, who knows? We're planting trees that we don't want to cut for 60, 70, 80 years.
Right.
And I'm not going to be here. and certainly, I mean, Dad's still, he's out there every day, and he's 89. And
Wow.
so, definitely for the next crowd. But also just what's going to live, right? It's not even, I mean, that was true for anybody planting trees. You rarely harvest the trees that you plant. It's always you're building on somebody else's. But now we're planting a lot of pine, because it's more drought resistant. It's also resistant to the root rot, the fungus in the soil that we have. We're also planting some new kinds of cedar, which are also resistant to that root rot. We've planted Port Orford and incense cedar. So we're trying, and we're mixing the species. So like the 12 acres that are the center of this book, that has Western white pine, Western red cedar, and Douglas fir. All, like, every third tree is a different tree. So we're hoping that one out of the three will survive.
Oh man.
Yeah, so it's really hard to know, but
Yeah.
we are determined to keep it in trees. We don't want, I swear, more than climate change, development is a pressure. I mean, to not sell it to the developers and make a ton of money, but we're not going to do that. But as houses come around you, it gets harder.
I bet. We got a question. I don't know if you'll want to answer this or not, but this is, do you have another book in mind? If so, what might it be?
Yeah. I don't know. Right now I'm writing poetry, or trying to write poetry. And all sorts of things are coming up. I have had in my head that I want to write a book about my mom and her journey in life. She started in the Panhandle of Texas and ended up in Ketchikan, Alaska, where she met my dad, and had a pipe organ in Toledo. And so, she's an interesting character, and then started ceramics at the age of 60. So
wow.
I want to write about her.
Wow. I would read that for sure.
Okay, good.
All right. Let me see. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Let me see. I was wondering too, if you could talk a little bit about, I thought it was really interesting. I hadn't really thought, there's been a lot of attention, I feel like, and portrayal of farmers and their profession, and you haven't seen that of people raising trees. And I hadn't thought, so many things in this book, I hadn't thought about it that way before. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the sort of cultural divisions that you see, understanding that world, and then dealing with people outside of it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's just such a disconnect. The people who are in the cities don't understand what a working forest is. They know that they know parks, they know, like, a national forest where nothing is touched. And then they might have an idea of, like, hybrid cottonwood tree farms where just trees are planted in a row. My dad calls those fiber farms. That's not what we want. I mean, and I think part of the problem is we don't know, we can't understand destroying beauty, right? I mean, forests are beautiful, and we want our forests to be beautiful and provide clean water and clean air and habitat for animals and all of that. And we're going to cut them down so that we can do it again. Because in order to hold the land, you have to make some money off the land. But also, I don't know, here, like, if you look at the park in Forest Park, the trees are going to die at some point. And there are no undergrowth stories, because it's all, I mean, it's just not a healthy forest, and it's not going to work. But we can't understand that. Yeah, I think that in death, we can't understand death. And we fight death at all times, right? Even, you know, I don't want to be too philosophical here, but the death of a tree is a really hard thing for people.
Yeah.
So I think but so one of my goals is to get as many city people out to the tree farm as possible. And I've offered as an auction prize to 2 different organizations here in Portland, 2 copies of my book and a tree farm tour with s'mores at the end.
Wow,
so
nice.
one group from where I used to teach, the Park Rose Educational Foundation auction winner, is coming out at the end of June. The other one, somebody bought it but didn't sign up, and they haven't contacted me yet, so I don't know if they'll come. Yeah. But I don't know. So yeah, I think people need to come out. They need to see it.
Yeah. Yeah. We got another
So
question.
just recently, someone found me from the Family Forest Foundation website, and she works for a documentary producer, and they want to maybe do something about a family forest. I'm like, yes, please, yes, please.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I know, but I think she's got some other stories to pitch. I'm not sure if family forests are going to make it, but I hope so.
Yeah. No, that would be amazing. That would be amazing. We've got another question from Phil and Melody Wilson. Have you felt any have you felt any surprising responsibilities after publication of the book?
Surprising responsibilities. Well, I feel responsible for getting the message out, you know, but it's interesting because I certainly did. My first impulse of writing this book was not about the message of family forests. It was, dealing with my brother's death and figuring out what my place was on the farm. But in the end, I think one of the strong messages of the book is it's okay to cut down a tree. Or, I mean, family forests that is a part of family forests. And so I feel responsible for continuing to get that message out. So in a way, that's a surprise. I didn't know that was going to be a message that I had in the book.
Yeah. Okay. Hold on. Well, if we don't have any other questions, I want to thank Anne for doing this. I was so excited to have you here, and thank again the foundation for supporting this program. I want to say we have the book at the library, of course, but also some of you are probably familiar with Vault Books and Brew in Castle Rock, and the owner informed me that she's got 20 some copies in next week, and she's going to have Anne for reading in July. So I really, really urge you to get out there and get a hold of a copy of this book because it's a remarkable thing. So thank you.
I think there's also a few copies at the Columbia River Reader office.
Oh, excellent. Yes.
Yeah.
And do you have any other events, Anne, that you want to talk about? Yeah, I know you're.
I'm going to New York in June. It's sort of a trip. A friend of mine is going to host a party for me there, and then a friend of mine who I invited, he said he has a new job as the events coordinator for the Yale Club. So I'm going to go talk at the Yale Club.
Whoa, nice. Wow.
I know. So that's exciting. Wow. Other than that, not at the moment.
Bringing family forestry to the Yale Club. That's
right.
Good.
You know, Yale has the first forestry school in the country.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway.
All right. Well, thank you again for joining us. That was great.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.